a shiur first, and then we're going to show the video from the Shloshim for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. So if you have seen it, you'll be bored, you could be on your phone, it's all good. And then afterwards, we're going to do a chesed activity in my mom's memory. So, yeah. First of all, thank you all for coming. It means a lot to my dad and I, and my grandma, and everyone else who is in here right now. Okay. This shiur's topic, I'm going to do it without the microphone. Can everyone hear?
Yeah.
Can? You said that? Okay. So, the topic of the shiur is Hachnasat Orchim. And a lot of you have been in my house. So, I'm hoping that you feel the same way, but I think that my mom was one of the people who was really big on Hachnasat Orchim. She loved having people over, she loved having people sleeping there, having meals with us, etc. אני מצטערת שזה לא בעברית, למי שלא יודע, כל המקורות על הדף אבל, אז אני מקווה שזה יסתדר. So yeah. So aside from all those things and having people over constantly and cooking for people and really enjoying that, I'll tell you guys a little story. One night when I was 11, I went to sleep in my parents' bedroom while my parents were out getting Titi, my great aunt, to a rehab center. Just in case, I went to sleep in their bedroom, and I woke up to her sleeping in my bedroom where she stayed for 8 months. She had undergone multiple strokes and was basically dying of cancer. And the doctors told us that she had days or even weeks left to live, and yet she was able to live for 8 months in our house. And my mom constantly told us throughout all the struggles, Titi never had a family, she never had kids, she never had love and a support system, and so it was super important for us to bring her into our home and give her that during her final days, months. So I'll start with that. Okay, everyone knows the story of Abraham in Bereshit, when after he's circumcised and it's really hot outside and he sees 3 guests and they're actually angels and he brings them in. And the Torah really emphasizes the point of him being enthusiastic and like very ready to do Hachnasat Orchim for them. Vayaratz likratam, vayomer mehari, ratz Avraham veikach ben bakar. He's running around, he's excited, he's enthusiastic, he's bringing them in with what seems to be real happiness. And he even tells God, Im na matzati chen b'einecha, al na ta'avor me'al avdecha. Okay, BRB God, I'll be back when I'm done bringing in Hachnasat Orchim, and we'll continue whatever conversation we've been having. And then afterwards, we know that he's blessed with the prophecy, or the angels tell him that he's going to have a child, and eventually that actually does happen. Later on in Bereshit chapter 19, Lot also does Hachnasat Orchim. He sees the 2 angels, and he brings them in, and they say, no, we'll sleep somewhere else, and he insists on having them stay. And then the bolded part, Pasuk Gimel, is him urging them to stay and preparing a feast for them. And they ate. He ends up getting in a little trouble with this, but eventually he's saved from the destruction of Sodom, and he leaves. So this is the basis for Hachnasat Orchim that we see in the Torah. Then we move on to Masechet Chagiga. Sorry, I forgot to put the page. I think it's the last page. Yeah, it's the last page. And we're discussing the different vessels in the Beit HaMikdash. And we're talking about the Mizbeach being different from the rest of the vessels. And they ask, like, what's going on here? What's so different? And there's a whole discussion about it being grounded, the coating, all these things. And in the end, we are taught, בזמן שבית המקדש קיים, מזבח מכפר על האדם. When the Beit HaMikdash was still around, the altar would atone us. ועכשיו, שולחנו של אדם מכפר עליו. Now a person's table is what atones him. What does this mean, a person's table? Rashi comments and he says, שולחנו מכפר עליו בהכנסת אורחים. Bringing in your guests is what actually atones you. So this is already taking it to a next level. It's not just a mitzvah now. It's something that actually is like saving us. Then in Masechet Shabbat, we're talking about moving around baskets on Shabbat. We have a case of the rabbis arguing about this, and you can read for more detail. But we ask, why are we allowed to move the baskets for the guests? Like, what is going on? That's like not okay. Amar Rav Yochanan, Gdola Hachnasat Orchim Kehashkamat Beit HaMidrash. Which English translation, hospitality towards guests is as great as rising early to go to the study hall. And then they say no. Amar Rav, Gdola Hachnasat Orchim Mi'akabalat Pnei Shechina. Right? It's bigger than receiving the divine presence. And he quotes the part of Avraham saying to God, hold on a second, I'm going to do Hachnasat Orchim. And we learn from this really that it's greater than Shechina. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, and then the Mishnah Torah later on also quotes this, and V'gdola Hachnasat Orchim mi'akabalat pnei Shechina. But what exactly is this talking about, right? What's so special about Hachnasat Orchim that it's bigger than like receiving divine presence? Like that seems a little bit of an exaggeration, right? I'm having dinner with my friends on a Friday night, and we're saying that this is better than receiving divine presence. Like, what kind of thing is that to say? So the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim goes into detail what this is actually talking about, what the mitzvah actually is, and he says, "Velo mikrei orchim, ela shenitarchu etzlo bebeito, o shezimen orchim shenitarchu etzel acherim." It's not about having people over; it's people who are actually sleeping over, or sleeping somewhere else, and you're bringing them over to your house. אבל כשזימן חברו לסעוד אצלו, לא מקרה אורחים, ואינו סעודת מצווה, רק סעודת רשות. It's not about having your friends over, right? It's about actually having people, he says, that are sleeping over, but it's really people who are in need. People who actually need you to have them over. And that is the essence of the mitzvah. So then the question is, and this question is presented in Pninei Halacha as a she'ela that's asked, האם אפשר כיום לקיים מצוות הכנסת אורחים? Can we even fulfill this mitzvah today? Because nowadays, thank God, we have Tzomchei Shabbat, we have machim, soup kitchens, homeless shelters. Nobody really, like, their life is dependent on you. Even with my aunt, okay, she would have lived less, but she would have been okay in the rehabilitation center. Like, it wasn't, her life was depending on us. So can we actually fulfill the mitzvah of Hachnasat Orchim to the extent that it's talking about that is greater than receiving divine presence? So we're going to backtrack to Bereshit in chapter 2. A little bit of a sad part of creation. When man is by himself on earth, God creates him, puts him down, and he goes and he talks to the animals, open to interpretation, and he really doesn't have like someone to communicate with. And at some point it says, in Yudchet, it said, Vayomer Hashem Elokim, Lo tov hayot ha'adam levado, e'aseh lo ezer kenegdo. Right? It's not good for a man to be lonely and to be by himself. So then the next, on page 7, I brought a New York Times article by Katie Hackner. And she's talking about the epidemic of loneliness. And this is already 2016, a few years after creation, when we're experiencing the same problem, although there are tons of people on this earth, not just Adam. So I'll read a little story from it. This is talking about like a helpline. The woman on the other end of the phone spoke lightheartedly of spring and her 81st birthday the previous week. Who did you celebrate with, Beryl asked Allison, whose job was to offer a kind ear. No one, and with that, Beryl's cheer turned to despair. Her voice began to quaver as she acknowledged that she had been alone at home, not just on her birthday, but for days and days. The telephone conversation was the first time she had spoken in more than a week. About 10,000 similar cases come in weekly to an unassuming office building in the seaside town on the northwest reaches of England, which houses the Silver Line Helpline, a 24-hour call center for adults seeking to fill a basic need, contact with other people. So it's 2016, and this problem of loneliness still exists to the extent that we have helplines for old people to be calling just to have someone to speak to. So clearly it's not just about Bereshit and Adam. And they go on in the article and explain loneliness is a big devastation. It's a predictor for early death. It's a critical public health problem. Enough for them to write an article about it. And they explain, like, this helpline is wonderful, but the problem is that the line, they say, can help reduce feelings of loneliness temporarily, but it is not likely to reduce levels of chronic loneliness. Meaning, It's great, but it's not a replacement for human interaction. And later on, they're talking about, in Britain, they're building what's called men's sheds, where people can come and hang out with other adults or older people instead of staying home and being lonely. So they interview this guy, Pierce House. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he says the pieces he produces are gratifying, but not nearly as gratifying as the human connections he's made. And he's saying he would feel much emptier without the shoulder-to-shoulder way of confiding he has come to know. So Britain's working on this, but it doesn't really make sense to me how we can have so many people on this planet, and yet so many people sitting at home feeling alone, feeling like they have no one to go to. They have to call a helpline. They have to go to a men's shed in order to get human interaction. And I think it is right that it's actually a public health problem. Okay, so after this article, there's a picture of my mom and grandpa holding hands. This is from January. His yahrzeit was last week. And this is us visiting him in the hospital because we didn't want him to end up like those people who ended up calling helplines. And my mom was one of the people who urged us, my dad and I specifically, to constantly go to him and to visit him and to be with him while he was dying. And the night after this, he passed away. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we gave him support and he felt like he was ready. And then, so we didn't solve the problem yet, but we're getting there. The tshuva that's given in the Pnei Halacha is that, I'll read it in Hebrew and translate. Emet, nachon she'ayom kimat she'en anashim re'evim lelechem, ve'kimat she'en anashim she'en lahem echan lishon. It's true that nowadays we don't have people who are dependent on us for food and for sleeping place. Ach bechol zot, well, not always anyway, not as commonly as before. Ach bechol zot, yeshnam kayom anashim rabim shezkukim lesad ve'idud. There are still people who are needing of us to support them, basically. המצווה אם כן נשארה, אבל הדגש השתנה. The mitzvah still exists, but why it exists is a little different now. עובדה היא שבדורנו אין פחות אנשים מדוכאים, אין פחות התאבדויות. There are still people who are suffering of depression, who are suicidal, who feel like they're alone in the world. ואם כן, עלינו להסיק שלמרות שרמת החיים מבחינה חומרית עלתה, even though our materialistic life has become easier, איכות החיים מבחינה נפשית ורוחנית לא עלתה. Our spirituality and our ease and our, I would say, mental health even, has not risen. ובמידה מסוימת, דווקא השפע הגשמי הבליט יותר את ייסורו הנפש. And furthermore, this materialistic rise does the opposite effect on for our soul, our nefesh. ורבים יותר חשים כיום בדידות וניכור, ואין כמו מצוות הכנסת אורחים בכדי להפיג את ייסורי נפשם. More people are feeling alone and depressed, and there's nothing like the mitzvah of Hachnasat Orchim to lift their spirits. כללו של דבר, בזמננו העוני הקשה ביותר הוא העוני הנפשי הרוחני. Nowadays, the real challenge is our spiritual challenge and our spirit challenge, I guess. ומצוות הכנסת אורחים הולכת ולובשת פנים יותר רוחניות של סעד ותמיכה. And the mitzvah of Hachnasat Orchim is now about providing support to people who need it, and it's not necessarily materialistic. ישנם אנשים שאיבדו את הכיוון בחיים, התייאשו מעצמם ומעתידם. There are people who have lost their direction in life and lost hope in themselves and in their futures. אירוח טוב, אוהד וחם, יכול לחזור ולטוע בקרבם את האמונה שיש ערך לחייהם, שאנשים מעריכים אותם, שמחים להיות במחיצתם ומעוניינים לעזור להם. Good הכנסת אורחים is the type that's supposed to give people hope again, basically, and make them know that they're cared about and loved, and that someone wants to be and is happy to be with them. ומתוך כך ישובו כוחות החדשים להמשך החיים. And from this visit, they should have newfound strength to continue living their lives. ואשרי אדם שיודע לראות מי מחבריו זקוק לעידוד. And really, אשרי אדם to the person who can open their eyes and see who from amongst them is in need of their support. So I think that my mom was able to do this, and she was able to open her eyes and see when someone needed her, and was able to support them in a way that after they would leave her home, they would be feeling good about themselves and knowing that someone was happy to be with them and wanted to be with them. And I think that she is one of the rare cases of people who were able to fulfill this mitzvah, and that we have a lot to learn from that. With that, we're going to show the video, and then we'll explain the Chesed project.